So today I will present a part of my PhD topic, which is populism and judicial independence. For that, I will structure the exposition, the conference in a first part dedicated to describe what is the meaning of populism and then how it is related with constitutionalism and especially with judicial independence. And the purpose of all of that is like to offer an holistic view of how populism related with the tribunals or with courts. So as you know, populism is one of the most contested words in social science and in comparative law. The main problem of the word, of the concept of populism as a theoretical concept, is that it is used to describe mutually and radically different situations. For example, in Western societies, leaders from the right as Viktor Orban, as Benjamin Netanyahu, as Giorgia Meloni, as Marine Le Pen, they are described as populist. But also in the left, we can find, for example, Pablo Iglesias, Syriza, in Italy, Beppe Grillo, or Bernie Sanders are also described as populists. And the same happens in Latin America. Latin America, that has been described by some as the land of populism. We have representatives of populist rights, like Jair Bolsonaro and Rafael Hernández, but also in the left, like Rafael Correa, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, Hugo Chávez, and Evo Morales. So if we want that populism signifies something, or to convert the term in a useful and operative concept, we have to establish a compression. And in social science, today, we can see an interesting debate that they are trying to describe populism as a discourse, as a style, or as a theme ideology. This is very interesting. It has a lot of implications. And probably the most important thing is that the three of them said that populism divides society between an elite and the people. The people, it's virtuous, and the elite, it's corrupt. But for our purposes, that is understand how populism relates with tribunals, it's useful to define populism by the way that he relates with the people, the description of the people, and by the way that he relates with the theory of democracy. The people, it's a very important concept for populists, but also for the theory of democracy. The people, it's the source in which it is invoked in order to legitimize the exercise of public power. In democratic theory, there is no answer or not a specific answer of how we define the people. It is still debated. But for populists, we can distinguish between two kinds of populists here. Those who define the people in an exclusionary way, because they say that there is a true people, and the others normally are members that are part integrated in the ethnical, racial, or religious minorities. And on the other hand, we have an inclusionary kind of populism that describes the people in an inclusionary way. They say that liberalism has failed and denounce that parts of the society have been marginalized from the constitutional project. And in that sense, some authors believe that populism can be reconciliated with constitutional project. But if we see how all kind of populism relate with the democratic theory, what we can see is that all kind of populism are against the constitutional limits, against the independence of the judiciary, because they have an anti-pluralist conception of democracy, or like as some authors call a majoritarianism or extreme majoritarianism of democracy, and just they can interpret what it is the meaning of the law. So because of their opposition to constitutional limits, we can say that populist constitutionalism as a concept is an oxymoron. It's an oxymoron, especially because they need to control courts. And why? Because if they control courts, they control what is the meaning of the Constitution, and they can end with the system of check and balances and concentrate power. It is true that we need other elements to defend democracy, like, for example, the civic compromise of people, but courts can do an important job in protecting democracy. And we have relatively recent examples, as, for example, the Mier case in the United Kingdom, no? When the government or when the executive tried to apply Article 50 of the treaties in order to leave the Union, the Supreme Court said, you have to apply Article 50, but it's not enough with the result of the referendum. As we are a parliamentary democracy, this needs to be voted in Parliament. So the tribunal prevented the United Kingdom to deform in a presbyterian democracy, not a parliamentary democracy. The same we can see, for example, when the Constitutional Court in Colombia said to prevent Álvaro Uribe for running to a third mandate, because he said that this would transform the constitutional regime and it can only be done by the constitutional power. And we have also example in South Africa, where the Constitutional Court condemned Zuma for corruption and for a crime of contempt and disobeying the courts. So tribunals are important to defend our democracy. And what they do with what is so important, they don't just defend check and balances, and constitution is not just the basic legal norm of our legal system. And the constitution helps to assure the political integration of the community. It offers a project for tomorrow, and it gives reasons of why the political community, it has to be a political unity. And this is normally done, like, for example, the preamble of the Constitution, with the symbol of the state, or the recognition of the constitutional rights. So, at the end, if the Constitution succeeds in political integration of the community, the normativity of the Constitution, it will also be benefit. Why? Because if people have the feeling that they belong to the community, if the Constitution is perceived as a norm of all the community and not just a few of them, the Constitution will endure and the political actors will assume the values of the Constitution as their own. But what they do, populists, with this integration function of the Constitution, those who see the people in an exclusionary way use the Constitution not to integrate, but to divide. And they positivize or regulate exclusionary values inside the Constitution or in the legal system as religion or as nationalism in order to divide. And for that, we have examples in Israel, in Hungary, in Poland, and in Turkey. But in order to illustrate that, I will use the case of Hungary and the case of Israel. So in the case of Hungary, in 2011, they approved a new constitution, and in that it has the preamble, which is called national avowal. It contains references to the Christianity, to medieval terms as the Holy Crown, and the national heritage and the duty of the state to protect the national duty of the national and cultural heritage of Hungarian culture. And it also established in Article R of the Constitution that all the texts have to be interpreted in accordance with the national avowal and the achievement of our historical constitution. The problem is that achievement of our historical constitution, it is a very indeterminate concept. And in no place it is said what is the historical constitution of Hungary. So this will be at last depend on the interpretation of the Constitution that the Constitutional Court will offer. In this case, as the Constitutional Court has been packed by the Orban government in 2016, we can, for example, see how in the reasonment, in the judgment, the Constitutional Court used the concept of historical constitution associated with national identity in order to infringe the policies of asylum seekers of the European Union. The same exclusionary function of the Constitution, we can see it in Israel. Israel is a very fascinating case. It was born as a modern state in 20th century, and since the beginning of the independence of the state, it has been described as a democratic and Jewish state. This has created some tensions in the development of the constitution of the country, and also they don't have a unique constitution. The constitution is in 13 or 14 basic laws which regulate the basic element of the state, the rights and the institutions. And the problem is that it is a very flexible constitution. And it can be, for example, they can approve a new basic law just without a simple majority in the chamber. Or they can reform the existent basic laws just in the majority of them, just by a simple majority in the Knesset. So in 2018, the government of Netanyahu decided to approve a new basic law. This basic law, that is entitled the Nation State of the Jewish People, it is like the preamble of the Constitution. And what it says is that the state of Israel is just the state of the nation state of the Jewish people. And only just the Jewish people have the right of self-determination. But the reality is that a quarter of the population is Muslim, and we have another minorities as Drusos that are ignored in this narrative, in constitutional narrative. And this law has been validated by the High Court in 2021. The High Court, in this case, is not, it is true that it has not been yet packed, but it has received a lot of pressure from the government, not just because of the verbal attacks that have directed or orchestrated the executive, but because in 2016, the government of Netanyahu tried to approve a reform very similar with the reform that it is trying to approve now. So in this context of pressure, the court decided to validate this basic law. It is true that not all populists want to use the constitution in order to divide. For example, in the case of Latin American countries, el nuevo constitucionalismo latinoamericano, or the new constitutional Latin American constitutionalism, they use the constitution to integrate the people that traditionally has been marginalized, especially the indigenous people, los pueblos indígenas. But in their case, as in the case of those who see the people in an exclusionary way, they reject the rule of law and judicial independence. And why? Because they see they have this conception, anti-plural conception of democracy, and nobody apart of they can say what is the meaning of the Constitution, what is the meaning of the popular will. And in order to do that, they have to prevent the existence of independent courts, of independent judges. As the independent judiciary, it is common accepted to be a pillar of the rule of law. It is needed in order to guarantee an impartial administration and interpretation of law. It promotes economic growth, and it defends the system of checks and balances and defend the democratic structure of the state. The problem is that populism are not sincere and doesn't reveal his true intentions. They are not going to say that they are going to finish or to end with judicial independence. They say that they want to build a more accountable judiciary, and they want to invigorate the democratic legitimacy of the judiciary. And that makes perfect sense, because judges are not isolated islands in the constitutional system. They have not absolute power, that they must be accountable, and they must be inspired by the democratic legitimacy that inspire all the functioning of the state. But what they do, it's the opposite. They use a traditional mechanism of court packing or mechanism to weaken the courts. In the case of court packing, for example, they instrumentalize the selection method of judges, the appointment or nomination process, or the disciplinary actions. In this case, we have to remember that Mauro Capelletti, when he wrote the book about the responsibility of judges, advised or prevent us in order not to convert the disciplinary mechanism, the accountability mechanism, in a mechanism of repression. That is just what populists do with the accountability of judges. So they use mechanism of nomination, of appointment, or removal in order to pick their judges. Later, if do you want, we can speak particularly about the methods. In every country, they adapt the method that they use. And it depends, for example, breaking the law, controlling the judges by breaking the law, it can happen only in very specific circumstances, where, for example, in Poland, where for the first time the presidency and the parliament were in the hands of the same party, and this party was determined not to accomplish with the constitution. So when the two powers are against the other one, it is very hard to defend if there is no civic compromise in the citizenship, in the citizens. And in court packing, in controlling the process of nomination and appointment, they use arguments that are very similar to the arguments offered by the critical legal studies from the 17th and 18th years of the last century. These arguments were basically that we can't differentiate between the legal sphere and the political sphere, that judges just decide in function of their political preferences. As they are part of the elite, and they don't interpret the law in accordance with the interest of the people, and as all law, it's politics, they feel legitimized to change the judges, because they are defending the people in changing these judges that form part of the league. And we can say these arguments in Hungary, in Poland. In Poland, in fact, the government have financed campaigns against the judges, where the public can see some controversial case, for example, cases that have been characterized by delay, or where the result have been unfairly, they consider. So they point as the judiciary to be as a part of the elite, as the enemies, and they substitute by the all judges. Also Trump, we can see now that they speak about Obama's judges, our judges, and our judges. On the other side, we see that if they are not for court packing the court, what they do is weaken the court. And in order to weaken the court, they reform the judicial review dimension. And in this sense, they compare themselves with political constitutionalist scholars. They say, we want to reform the dimension of the judicial review because courts have empowered and have still the voice of the people in parliament. So we want to a proper constitutional dialogue. But this is false. They don't have a consistent theory of judicial dialogue, of the judicial review theory. They don't want to end just with the supremacy of the judiciary, as for example, the political constitutionalist one. they want to end with judicial independence. And this, we can see this if we see or if we study of what populists do in a comparative perspective. For example, in Venezuela, the Constitution of 1999 empower and give more power to the courts in order to make judicial review. And while the government was in the hands of el chavismo, the court was passive and exercised its power of judicial review. When in 2015, el chavismo lose the elections in front of the opposition, the court, who has been empowered first by the constitution, start to have an active role and control the parliament. In Hungary also, the dimension of the judicial review was reduced, and the aspects of the taxation of the budget was suppressed from the capacity of the court to resolve in that aspect. And nowadays, in Israel, it's another good example. In fact, today, the government of Israel have proposed a general reform of the judicial system. Today, in fact, the committee in Knesset, the Committee of Constitutional Affairs and Judicial Reform, have been reunited during the morning, and they are discussing a legal reform which is named, it's very illustrative because the name of the judicial reform is Zion shall be redeemed with justice. So another time, populists, they say that they are defend the legal system is unfair, so they are just making it more fair and justice. In fact, for example, in Turkey, the party of the president, it is called Party of Justice and Development. In Poland, it is also Law and Justice. So they appeal to this concept of justice in opposition of the law, and of course, they say what is justice. This reform basically proposed in Israel to introduce a general clause to override. This will allow the parliament to annul or to void the decision of Supreme Court, and also they are proposing a changing or a modification in the selection method of judges in order that the executive can control the composition of the court. Why is so important for them to control tribunals, to end with judicial independence? Because once the court is packed by populist leaders, they don't do an impartial interpretation of law. They benefit systematically the government and reject the proposals of the opposition, especially in what it is the structure of the state. And they make an abusive interpretation of all concepts or instruments of the constitutional state. For example, they misuse the power to amend the constitution, they misuse the constituent power, and they misuse the national identity. And all of that in order to concentrate power in the hands of executive. And this, it is very clear in the case of European Union. In the case of European Union, the packet courts, as in Poland or Romania or Hungary, use a concept which it is in the treaties, national identity, in order not just to destroy the European rule of law, because they don't accept the principle of the primacy of the European Union law, but they appeal to this national identity disposition in order to justify the national legal reforms which make the state more liberal. So when in Poland and Romania, the European Court of Justice declared that the reforms of the judiciary were against the principle of judicial independence of Article 19 of the Charter, after that, the constitutional tribunals in Romania and Poland said that that the European Court of Justice has acted ultra vires, that has used political arguments, not legal arguments, and that declared the primacy of the Constitution over the primacy of European Union law. So this show how populist courts or populist courts interpret a concept that in origin, the purpose of it was to recognize the pluralism legality of the Union in order to justify the regression of the liberal state. And just in order to end this exposition, I think that we can, I have like some question that you are free to answer or to propose, no? First of all, it is true that we need to defend judicial independence, but what is the best institutional system that allows us to make this possible? It is enough with the jure protections, or it is also important the compromise of the people? Also, how can the courts influence in defend themselves against populists? Because in some places there is argued that the courts have been very active, and this has attracted the attention of populists in order to capture the courts. So what is the exactly paper of the courts that the courts must do, especially in democratic transition? Or the European model is of judicial councils. It's the best one because, for example, in the case of the Eastern, Central Europe, of the Eastern and the center of Europe, this model have not prevented the end of have not defend the independence of the judiciary. In fact, it has like invigorated some tendencies of hierarchy inside the judiciary. And thank you for your attention. And thank you.
Okay, thanks indeed, David. We have a lot of time for questions and comments. So we're gonna start. I don't know if our friends that are connected online also want to join us. I mean, they could use the virtual end, or they could write down in the comments in the chat, and we will give you the floor, of course. Any questions or comments on the reading to presentation? And otherwise, I'm happy to break the ice. Okay, so yeah, Nixon, you should have been talking from here, and otherwise, our friends online won't hear you.
All right, I'll stand here. Take my voice.
Yes, yes.
So the first thing, I just want to appreciate and congratulate him for the topic, because I think what we call populism is a very current thing, and it's really affecting us, and it's what we call a quagmire that we have to deal with. There's a question you raised on how can we, help the judiciary to strengthen itself so that it is able to counter some of the challenges they are facing. And my thinking was that, are there possibilities of creating structures where the judiciary can, what you call this structure or this body can employ the judiciary, can be in charge of the budget of the judiciary, and can also deal with disciplinary measures for the judiciary? Because at the point the office of the president or the executive is directly involved in this, then automatically you expect to see what you call biases, or what you call the leadership wanting to flood or pack the courts with their own people. But if this basic functions, basically the three, are taken away from the judiciary, then it provides what you call an independent opportunity or avenue where the judiciary or people who are appointed as judges can be independently selected, can be, their salaries can be determined by that body. And if there are problems within these judges, then what do you call, this is the body that can look at that. That's one. Now, there's something also that I wanted to say in terms of populism. You mentioned something very well that, populism is really taking center stage because there's a failure of liberalism, which is very true because now people are feeling with liberalism, things are not working. And that is why, the populists are taking a center stage. I don't know if there are other push factors apart from the deficiencies of liberalism. I don't know, that was my question. But thank you very much.
One answer immediately or shortly from that.
We'll collect another.
All right. Any other questions? Yeah, I have two questions. Yes, Camilla first. I don't see the chat, so perhaps you should close your PowerPoint in this way. Yeah, this one, yeah.
So I
Yes.
don't know if now they can hear me. I hope.
Very well.
So just two short comments and one question. One first comment is that bear in mind that in the meantime, they added a paragraph 4 to Article R of the Constitution, which furtherly, of course, it provides a further opportunity of or object of analysis because it establishes that each authority, each body of the state shall protect the constitutional identity and the Christian culture of Hungary. So, and of course, if you need, I don't know if you in your PhD thesis want to analyze the Hungarian basic law. I can provide you also some translation for the memorandum of understandings because each and every amendment to the constitution has a memorandum of understandings which basically explains the reason why that specific amendment with the specific dispositions was needed or considered needed. And they are very interesting in it because you can also you can see also a progress and an evolution, of course, in the direction that depends on your interpretation, from the first amendments to the last one, which was last year, the 11th ones. And the other comment, I really enjoyed the fact that you distinguish between the exclusionary and the inclusionary populism, because what I see from my personal example in Hungary, that we are really exclusionary. So Hungarian populism is exclusionary even towards its own people. So actually at this point, after 12 years, I cannot tell you who is inside the people, the concept of the people, because everybody tends to, so it's considered outsider. And the other, question mine is regards the distinction between the ordinary court system and the constitutional court, because for me it wasn't always clear when you talked about the effect of the populism to the constitutional court or to the ordinary court, because what I can tell you from the Hungarian example is that yes, the constitutional court is in the hands of the government, so it's a fact. But the ordinary court system, it's more difficult to assess the independence of the ordinary courts and the ordinary judges because they tend to be reactive to some extent. If for your further research you need some information, I'm really happy to help you. Also because most information I remember only in Hungarian. So and for this just maybe a clarification with regard to other countries, or for example, Latin America, which is very fascinating. Example, how the ordinary court system reacts to populism. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I have another question.
I answer. Like so.
You first, it's a them job.
Okay.
The chat. Please speak from here because otherwise they won't hear you. Please.
Okay, just one comment and one question for you. One comment related to exclusionary populism and Turkey issue, because in Turkey, as far as I understand, in exclusionary populism, you divide it into the, for example, into constitutional or for the court packing process. You told that in the first case, it's possible to increase the number of the judges and the judges. And the second one is the selection procedures and playing with those selections process. And I saw that Turkey was the exclusionary populism, but in terms of the increasing the judge, but maybe in addition to that, there is also some changes after the constitutional amendments in 2017 for also the changes of the selection of the judges. Maybe I would like to note that. And the second question, when I'm thinking about the Hungary, Poland, and Turkey, I was also seeing that there's some interesting form of association with international law, because both of our, for example, they are trying to withdraw from the Istanbul Convention. Poland tried to do it, Turkey done it, and Hungary have some doubts on the Istanbul Convention, but not only on the gender studies, but also they have a strong resistance to imply and obey to the rules of the, for example, European Court of Human Rights, for example, other international bodies. So in terms of what we think about those countries who are also populist, but also how do they associate with the international law? Because they would like to stay in the place of those international environments. They would like to stay there. They would like to, for example, enter the EU, or they would like to stay the European Council, European Commission, but they are opposing their judge, and they are avoiding to implement their judgments, for example. So I just would like to ask to you that what do you think about this kind of not obeying and in compliance of the international jurisprudence, maybe in what sense? Thank you.
Thank you, Giacomo, and then I will say, we'll give the floor to David for his answer. Yeah.
Thank you, David, for your presentation. My question has to do with the European model of judicial councils. If you take a look at the advisory opinions released by the Venice Commission, or also the institutional debate in Spain, you get a feeling that the model like the Italian one is a good example. So the idea of a judicial council with a majority of judges chosen by the peers. But if you take a look at the recent developments in Italy, you may face other counter arguments that have to do with this specific feature of the institutional organization that is not so much populist capture, but let's say non-transparent dealings between elected politicians and some elements in the judiciary. So this may be possibly be a counter argument. So what are you feeling in this respect? Because this has also to do with the popular trust in the judiciary. Thank you.
Giacomo,
But okay. Regarding the first questions, well, thank you for all your interesting questions. And regarding the first one, yes, of course, one of the purpose or the mechanism to defend judicial independence is to guarantee this independence by the jure norms, like guaranteeing budget autonomy, and that the selection or the promotion of judges or the disciplinary actions, it is competence of autonomous bodies. No, we have also the ministerial style of judicial government, but the judicial government, in order to prevent that the judiciary can be instrumentalized, they use these autonomous bodies. The problem, I would say, is that the jure norms are not enough in order to protect this judicial independence. That you need, like society, have democratic values in order and are in this position to defend judicial independence. And that, for example, among judges exists the compromise with these democratic values. For example, in Poland, when they try to nominate, and I think also maybe in Hungary, when they try to nominate judges, clearly judges, the candidates in order to be judged in the Constitutional Court were really very few of them. It was not a very participatory process, and the candidates were not the best candidates of the system. So the compromise of the judges and the civil society is important to defend this independence, and not just like the budget. It is important, but not just like the autonomy of the budgetary or presumptuary autonomy, the selection method autonomy, and of course, when there is a lot of causes, not just the failure of the liberalism, but the failure of more the social state, that can have not offered like equality for citizens. We can speak about how populism misuse the social media, to communicate directly with the people, to promote political extremism. So there is a lot of factors that have affected this crisis of democracy and that promote that judges increase their pay for. And Camila, your question is very interesting. In fact, it is very important to distinguish how populism relates with the constitutional courts and how related with the ordinary system of justice. First of all, to pack the constitutional court is more easy because there are like 12 or 15 members usually, so it's easiest, and you control all the interpretation of the system. Here we can ask or we can question if in this sense it's better to have a decentralized system of judicial review as United States. But in order to, the problem is that it is harder to control the ordinary judiciary. But they need to control the ordinary judiciary because all judges have to interpret the law in accordance with the Constitution. So the risk is that the danger is, especially in the European Union, that we have the preliminary reference, that national ordinary judges start to do like a diffuse judicial review. So in order to do that, what they must control is the councils of the judiciary. So they pay a lot of attention, for example, to the composition of the council and to control the career of judges. And in order to be promoted, maybe the ordinary judge, it would have more independence in the ordinary level. But if this ordinary judge wants to be promoted, it will depend on the Council of the Judiciary. If the Council of the Judiciary is backed also by early members of the government, it will be harder for this judge that is trying to apply the law and the rule of law to promote in the judiciary. I don't know if there was something else. Right, if there is something else, we can skip them.
No, I was wondering how the situation is in Latin America.
In Latin America. In Latin America, also they have the problem with Latin America, was not the problem, but they have centered their attention in constitutional or in high courts, because a lot of countries don't have like a specific constitutional court. They have constitutional chambers inside the high courts. And those who have, for example, inclusionary vision, they concentrate power, but as the concepts of the judiciary have not as the relevance as in Europe, the attention has been focused in the constitution or in the constitutional chambers. And that's it. Yeah, the case of the relation of populism first under international law, as they present human rights as not universal rights, but rights of liberal of Western values. They feel themselves entitled, like, to withdraw, for example, Turkey with the Istanbul Convention, or also those in Central Europe who believe that they represent like a liberal democracy or liberal values or more conservative religious values to pull out of these treaties. And also we can see this in Latin America because Hugo Chavez withdrew the country from la Convención Latinoamericana because the tribunal was defending the independence of judges and have condemned Venezuela in order of the infringement of the Pacto de San Jose. And Chavez decided, okay, I will not comply, so I will withdraw from the organization. So this opposition between populism and international law, it is one of their main characteristics also. And in the case of Turkey, I don't know what, I don't have clear what is the answer, but in fact, in the PowerPoint, it appears that one of the mechanisms to control or the appointment or nomination process is through the increasing of the name of judges. But in Turkey, it's interesting that it was by decreasing the name of the judges, because the reform of 2017, reduce. It's like reverse the reform of 2010. 2010 increase the numbers and make it more plural because it was like nothing plural before. But after in 2017, Erdogan changed their mind and said, okay, I will reduce and I and the parliament, we will control the Council of the Judiciary, and nobody besides, correct me if I'm mistaken, but nobody besides these both actors intervene. The judges that don't directly intervene now in the appointment of the Council of the Judiciary. And this was introduced in 2010. So it changed the mind in order to better control the judiciary.
Not only increase or decrease, but also selection process. Not Turkish constitutional law that give minimum members and 12 members was directly appointed by
It's also a small comment, not only increase or decrease, so not only playing the numbers, but also selection process was affected because after 2017, the Constitutional Court right now has 15 members, but the 12 out of 15 is directly appointed by the president, right now, of course. So that kind of what also selection process.
Exactly. And in fact, it's not just to raise the number. You have to raise the number and to change the method of appointment or selection. For example, in Hungary, they increase the number for 11 to 15, if I am not mistaken, but they say that the candidates will not be nominated by a parliamentary commission that the criteria was parity criteria in order to allow all the groups to participate in the election of judges. They changed this criteria, the parity criteria, in order to a proportional criteria. And as the government have a clear majority in the parliament, it have also this majority in the commission. So just the government can propose the candidate. So it's not just like to the numbers, it's the method, what it is important. The last question, Giacomo, also very, very interesting. Yeah, every system have its own problems, but the council of the judiciary system, for example, it's not like a perfect solution. In fact, in every country that it have been implemented, Spain is another great example. I think it is highly politicized, and it is parties have established like quotas in order to fill the council with members which are very which can be identified as friends or as a part of the ideologies. But the case is that this is the case. It is interesting because in Eastern Europe, the model was applied before the judiciary was democratized. So in these countries where it were typical from that have had a ministerial model of judicial government, the introduction of they were very hierarchical organizations. So the introduction of the council without the democratization, previously democratization of the judiciary, just served to empower these tendencies, but in another organ, in the council, in that case. I think that the Anglo-Saxon or the common law model have problems, but also, for example, I think that we have to think about the way of which judges are formed and educated. For example, in common law countries, as the person becomes judge after a long career, the system and the society know the merits and know the personality and the values of the person. As in Europe, dominates more a bureaucratic system with younger judges. There, they need more control by these councils because nobody knows what is the values of this judge or who is going to conduct this judge. So I think that this opens like a very interesting debate. And if nobody has like more questions or anybody
comments, I don't know if from the audience online they have. No, I don't think so. Any other questions from Nixon? Again,
yeah.
join us here.
Just in the judicial, very brief.
Yes.
The problem you have highlighted is a problem we had in Kenya. A president will, get all these people to sit on the benches, and it was a big challenge. So yes, the council could be having the problem, but I think the issue is what is making this council not to function. Is it that the members who are sitting there are taking sides, which automatically they will? So one of the things we did when we structured that is to have members serve within a town. You are not there forever. Additionally, the composition of what you call this body again, it is not only parliament that gets people there. We have the civil society, we have the Law Society of Kenya coming on board. Again, at the point one wants to maybe there is a vacancy that has been, there's a vacancy for a judge. It is an open process. So it's advertised within what you call it's gazetted, and everyone can apply. So when you apply, that body will select based on the application. Now, the other thing you address is, there are possibilities a young judges are appointed, they have no experience. For this situation, there are categories. For you to be maybe a high court judge, this is the qualification. Yes, qualifying this, these are the years of experience. So, I mean, when those things are put, very clearly and systematically, yes, it is not a perfect system, but I think it kind of creates safeguards for it.
Okay, thank you, Nixon. Any other questions? I have some comments. First comment, about the concept of abusing the constitutionalism. Don't you think that this concept is also oxymoronic, that for the same reasons that have led you to consider the other formula, a populist the constitutionalism and contradiction in terms. So that's why I don't use it, for instance, because there the abusive factor is not the constitutionalism per se. And accepting the analytical validity of this formula, in my view, is misleading, because it could tell us that the constitutionalism can be used in majoritarian terms, while the constitutionalism is inherently the majoritarian, in my view. Or at least in Cartesian terms, it is aimed at protecting minorities. So first point. Second point, concerning your case election. I'm not sure about how you're gonna select your case studies for your thesis. You're gonna cover all these national experiences, including you also referred to Venezuela, Bolivia, Hungary, Turkey. I mean, there are many cases. So you're gonna take all these cases, or do you plan to focus on some jurisdictions only, and in this case, which jurisdictions, and in the light of which criteria? And third element, even in the so-called left-wing forms of populism that are seen as more inclusive, you referred to Morales, perhaps. Even there, in my view, you can see actually this search for the enemy, in the sense that they tend to, find the enemy in the international community. So the external constraints, coming from the international community, are seen as a part of the counter the majoritarian change that are challenged by populism. So I think that even the left-wing forms of populism are exclusionary at a certain point. Well, what do you think about that? Thank you. Okay, I don't see other questions in the audience or in the public here on site, so I think that you can answer having the last say.
Okay. Regarding to Kenya, I will just say onto the system that so to avoid, because these tribunals or courts are not just in danger in the case of populist leadership, but also when someone has like authoritarian things. But in order to protect this judiciary, it is important, as you say, like the law, in order to have safeguards against, and for example, if more actors intervene in the process, it will be better because it will be prevented that someone concentrate power. But also with that, we have to count with a civic society compromised with its democratic values. It is important because if not, the president or the powers will cope with all the system. And regarding your interventions, Giuseppe, I totally agree with you that our using constitution.
That's the easy answer. You should stop it.
Sorry, but I totally agree with you that it's oxymoron. So I will change the term and I will speak about the abusive interpretation of the Constitution. But I think that we can there is, and also, for example, in the civil law, we have the concept of the abusive interpretation of law. So this, I think, that can work also for in the constitutional level. So totally agree. The case studies, my intention is like to build the normative theory, and in order to do that, I use all of these cases, but there is not like a case study. So I use them as an example of how they how populists interact with a specific nomination mechanism, appointment mechanism.
And don't you think that this would risk in making the comparative argument a kind of cherry picking exercise? This would expose you to criticism.
I think that there can be criticism, but if all the examples show the same phenomenon, and if, especially if I justify why these examples are used and not others, I think that we can avoid the risk of cherry picking. But I will take into consideration also. And regarding Evo Morales, here I agree and not agree. I'm agree in the sense that it is true that also in nuevo constitucionalismo latinoamericano, Hugo Chávez, Evo Morales, Rafael Correa, they have pointed at international elites or at internal oligarchies, but in the constitution, they don't have include any references, exclusionary references, and they don't have withdraw, for example, for international agreements in the case of Evo Morales or Rafael Correa. Yes, in the case of Hugo Chávez, but Venezuela has, it's just not a populist, but authoritarian on the whole. So, but I will say, I will continue to differentiate. Thank you, all, and
Well, thanks indeed. It has been a very fruitful morning. We learned a lot, and I'm sure that also David got many useful comments and questions. So thanks so much for joining me. Thanks also to our friends connected from Barcelona. I wish you a fantastic day despite of the awful weather. Here in Pisa, it's raining cats and dogs. Okay, so see you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.